Okay, so hello everyone. We are reviewing this PR. PR number is 30679. I officially reviewed this PR on the Bitcoin repo. You can see my name here in the reviewers list, and that's my final review for this PR listed here. And this PR got merged after two reviewers. Okay, me and Ryan. Not a very big PR. That's a small PR, but let's try to understand why we need to propose this PR to fix certain things. First of all, let's see what the owner says and what's he trying to do. So previously, when an invalid port was specified in rpcbind, the split host port return value in HTTP bind address was ignored and attempt would be made to bind to the default RPC port host. So let's try to understand what's the author trying to saying here. Let's go to the file changes. So as you can see, first of all, you can see the line number 377. The before the code implemented this line. That's a split host port. That's a function, and in this function, there is you'll pass a string and then you will get a port and host. We'll see how we can do this. Now, that's the old function and that's the new code written here. What's the improvement here? Like we are introducing a if condition here. Why we need to do? For example, if split port function returns any value like true or false or anything in between, we are just proceeding with the other function. You can see this function is huge. Like that's not end here in this line. It will extend, like it will start binding the address and all of these things, but it doesn't care about split host port. What this function will return, it doesn't impact this function's running or failure or anything like that. But after proposing these new line of code, we are restricting the functions and restricting the functions on the type of its returning value. Like if split host port returns true or false, will exit the function early, like from here in line 38382, you will return, it will returning false, so you will exit whole this function. For example, HTTP bind address function, this is the main function, HTTP bind address. So when split host port return like false or it's not successful, the the code return false here. It not proceed further. It not start the bind addresses and the other line of code doesn't proceed if this request is not successful. As you can see, before implementing these four lines of code, if it doesn't matter like if split host port returns true or false or anything, it just proceed with the further execution of the program. But we are restricting this execution here. First, that's the major change the author did in this PR. And the second thing he did is like make this new check host port options function. We'll see what this function do later, but we'll see like how this function is implemented, etc. So what the author did is deleted this line of code 1325 to 1368, remove these lines of code from here and make a new function called check host port options and put all of these lines here and then call this function from here. You can see that's the same function we created earlier, check host port option. will do in a great detail with examples and with also the reason behind doing introducing the if condition here is same as in the HTTP server we seen. For example, in the old PR you can see there is no function which there is a for condition for loop and the goes beyond this and it will proceed to execute no matter what this function is do or what it will return. It will start its execution till the functions end. But we are restricting this. We are creating a if condition. We are creating a new function called check host port options. And according to this, we are proceeding with the further calls. For example, if check host port options returns true, then we'll start the RPC server. Otherwise, we will return false here, and no further execution of the code will take place. There is one more example. The author shows us. Let's see in the conversations. As you can see, that's the previous behavior. Like if you pass source, Bitcoin D, and RPC allow and RPC bind ports, all of these things, you can see some of the ports are invalid. Like not a port is not a valid port. Minus 18002, it's not a valid port. And there are many other invalid ports are passed through the argument. Now, if we see the existing behavior, it will try to bind all of these ports and it will try to start the HTTP server whether without checking whether this is right or wrong. The port specified here is right or wrong. It will try to start the server, but it failed, and in last the node was shut down. But in the new behavior, if we pass invalid port here, like this is the invalid port, same example as above, these all are invalid ports. What it will do, because of the if condition we introduced in the new code base, it it checks early and gives us the error like this port is not valid. You need to pass the valid port to start the server. As you can see, it does not start any server, HTTP server, or further execution of the program. It just return, it just exit the thread here. It doesn't proceeding with the further calls, as you can see here. That's the lot of calls after passing the CLI. It will do many things. Why this will happen? Because we introduced the if condition in the codes. The one if condition is here. You can see if this is successful, if this function returns true, then we'll proceed with the further lines of the code. That's the further lines of the code. Bind address. You can see binding RPC on address. It will proceed, then start binding. Otherwise, it will return false, and this whole function will not proceed further. Same here. Without check host options, without it's true, it's not proceeding with the further lines of code here. It will just stop. It will stop here. If it's not true, it's not going to move all the way below to execute all of these lines. Okay, now let's understand what are these function is doing in a in detail. First, I will okay. Let's see what split host port. I will show my VS Code screen. Just a second. Okay. So let's see what this function is doing. That's a split host port function that we call. So this function is taking a string and passing the output in the like it is separating the port and host and storing these into the variable called port out and host out. So a string is it's like a string. It's like a address like 127.0.0.1. and a colon and a port. For example, a random port 4271, something like that. It's our string in it's called our string, and we are separating the address and host and port. Host is like a number. It's a number between 0 and the range of the host. I think it's 770 to 75,000 somewhere around. So first we are creating a boolean which is false. Okay, the valid is false because we didn't check anything right now. That's why it's false, and we are returning this valid in the end of the program. Now we are creating a, a, a variable of size t, like it is dynamic in size. What we are trying to do, we are finding the last of this. We are finding this column. Why we are need to find this column? Because it states that in our string there is an address, there is a separation between port and host. For example, uh, I think, yeah, I have a whiteboard. Can I share a whiteboard with you? Yeah, wait, wait. You can share a whiteboard. Is it visible?
Yes,
Whiteboard is visible. Okay. So, for example, if this is an address, okay, let me try to write. This is our address, and I'm zooming a bit. Okay. So what the code is trying to find? This position, uh, this colon position, as you can see here. This colon position. For example, what's the position of this colon? Like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. Oh, so 11. This position is 11. Our code is trying to find this position. That means if you find this colon position, that means that the address has a separation of port. This is the port and this is host. Okay, that means uh, that this colon means we have a host, we have a port. Both are exist in our code. And in the next line of code, we are we are checking for the IPv6 addresses. IPv6 addresses is like this. Let me change the color. Okay. IPv6 address is like 2001 and a colon, and you can think DB8. For example, this is an IP6 address. This is an IP6 address. Okay, so there are two columns in IPv6, two columns. Okay, so if there is an IPv6 address, it will try to find if string starts with a bracket. It will try to find if string starts with a bracket and ends with a bracket. Ends with a bracket. So yeah, as you can see in this example, the the string starts with a bracket and ends with a bracket. That means it's a IPv6 address. Okay, as you can see here, this is not this string doesn't start with a bracket and ends with a bracket. That means this is an IPv4 address. Now if we know how we will find this, like this is starting with this and this is easy. As you can, like, you can write string of 0 is equals to like this. You can easily compare this by using the code like similar to this. But how you can find the position of this string? That's also easy. Once we found the position of this column here, suppose its position is 11, then we step back one further from here, and then we can find this position because this is port and this is colon, and one step below there is bracket exists in every address format, no matter which address it is, uh, which which address it is in IPv6. We found this pattern everywhere. Okay, so after finding this, we are after finding this, one more thing we are trying to do is trying the multi-colon. For example, you can see in a simple address there is a single colon. There is a single colon, and in IPv6 address there are multiple colons. So one way to check if it's a IPv6 address is the first check if it starts with a this bracket and ends with a bracket. If it does, then it means it's a IPv6 address. The second way is to check if it has multiple colons. How we can check if there is a multiple colons? We'll just check like there is a colon right after the first colon. You can see there is a before, yeah, not after, before the first colon. Yeah, there is a colon exist. That also means this is the IPv6 address. We know how to proceed with this address. So, for example, uh, a multi-colon code will return false for this and true for this. Why? As I already said, let me fix this. Yeah, true for this. Why? Because it has a single colon, and right before this there is one. So there is no more colon. That means it's false. The multi-colon condition doesn't hold true there. And why it's true there? Because there exists some colon right after, right before this. Okay, that's the multi multi-colon function trying to do. Now let's go back to the code. Let's go back to the code. Okay. And now you can understand much easier what I was trying to saying. First, we found the position of the colon, and then there is a bool variant, the bool variable f have colon. It's checking like if there is exist a colon. If there is exist a colon, then this will store true because it's a bool variable. It's only store true and false. And there is a variable called f bracket, which I shown, that will check if it start with bracket and ends with a bracket. If it does, that means it's a IPv6 address. Now, how we are checking? We are checking same like n of 0, it's targeting the first element of the string, and for the second bracket, that's after the like colon minus one, our colon minus one is our the last bracket. That code will catch all of these things. Now there is a if condition. If have colons is true, that means the code contains minimum one colon, no matter whether it's IPv4 or IPv6 address. If it contains a colon or any of these condition is true, then the code proceeds. This will assigns an integer which is of type int16, and what it's trying, it's parsing this, it's parsing the port. You can see in is our whole string. The colon is our the colon is the separator between the port and the host. What we are trying to do here is we are taking substring For example, a colon plus one will give you the port, and we're splitting the port from the whole string and parsing it into the uint16. What uint16 is do? It's a range. It's basically a range like 0 to I think 75,000 if I'm not wrong. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's a range of integers. If it belongs to this range, then this if condition is true, and in we are storing only the host. Like the host is stored in, and the port is assigned to the port out. This function, the port is assigned to the, and the valid is true. Valid is obviously true, because if port has some value, like if it's greater than zero, I mean, then the port is valid. If it's not valid, this will change valid to false, and the valid false means this split host port function will return false after the execution. That means that's not the valid address or anything you are passing with. You are passing address or a host combination, host or port combination. That's not valid. So after this, there's a one more if condition here. This is simply also checking for the this what this condition is doing. It is removing the first and the last bracket from the host and then save the host. For example, let's wait. What this condition is trying to do. Board is visible.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay. So what this condition is doing, for example, let's delete this first. Okay, okay, delete this also. So now we are only left with the host part. That's our host. This all is our host. There is no port here, like there is no number after the two columns. That means code. And now we are removing these two brackets, first and last. Now we are only left with now we are only left with this line of code. That's our host in the case of IPv6 addresses. That's our host. We're trying to do here. Uh, okay. Wait. Okay. So you know the split host function here. Are this line of code is also visible to you? The green part.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So that's the new function we introduced, like check host port options. What this function is do is similar to this. Like the function we reviewed later is used here in the check host port. This function this function like takes the command line arguments from here, like what we written in the command line, like RPC port or any RPC we written. This code is taken this from here. This will check if it's a port or RPC port. If it's port or RPC port, it's getting its arguments from it's getting the command line arguments. For example, if you are passing hyphen port and then the port number, like anything port number you want, like 80 those values passed in the code. and then what it will try to do, it will simply check like whether this port belongs to a certain range. As I already said, like parse uint16 is a special type which only allows a integer from a specific range. If it's too less from this range or too high from the range, this simply returns false. That means our port is not in a valid range. So after parsing our port into this parse uint16, we'll know like our port is valid or not. Like as you can like you will see in the uh, as I showed in the conversation of the PR, there's the author passed some random ports like -12548 or not a port, something like that. So if you parse that kind of port related to non-integers or negative values or a values which is greater uh, for the range than uint16 allows, so it will return init error. Simply like this port you passed is not met the condition or you passed the invalid port here. It's simply just give you the error. Okay. And then if you if you use any other like rather than port or RPC port, like if you use proxy or rpcbind or any of these commands, and you will pass the string of host and port combination as I shown earlier, then what this code is doing, this is taking the arguments you passed in the command line, like in the Bitcoin command line, we will pass get args will fetch you all the details from the command line what you passed, what you written there. If you return multiple conditions there, it will extract out multiple conditions from there, and then uh, this will run a loop on a single on a like condition by condition. Like if you provide onion and proxy and RPC bind, if you provide three things here, then it will start a for loop first in the onion and in the proxy and then in RPC bind, like a line by line or a variable by variable. It will start executing, and what it's gonna do, it will pass your string into the same split host port function I shown earlier to you. Like what does split host port do? You know, it will split the host and port, and it will check whether the host is a IPv6 or IPv4 address. If it's true or not, the port specified in the in the respective string is valid or not. The split host port function will do all kind of things as shown earlier. And if we if we if we get true, then we'll proceed with the function. Then whole function returns value true. And if it's not, if some system does not support a Unix some Unix sockets, then it try to find some sockets and add them, and if it's not possible also, then it will simply return the error, like you can't do anything then. But okay, that's all for this program to check. And we also, where is my SCLI? I will share you my GitHub repo for this. Wait. Okay, so there is one more test case you can see here for this function. Like this test, there is a new test called run invalid bind test. What it's do, it's try to try to run the node with the faulty arguments. As you can see there, these all are faulty arguments you can pass, like not a port. That's not a valid string, host and port combination. As you can see there, like not a port is not a valid port. Minus 18443, it's not a valid port also, and 0 is also not a valid port, and this exceeds the port limit. We'll pass all these invalid ports. And that's the IPv4 version, and that's the IPv6 version of not a valid ports combinations. That's also not a valid port combination. That's for IPv4 and that's for IPv6. And we try to pass all of these, and we'll check if the program catches the right thing. For example, in this, we need to get this error invalid port specified in rpcbind. If we are getting this error after passing these ports, that means our new code functioning very well. Like it's good. We are catching those error early. So that's the it's a simple test which will strengthen our checks for this newly changed code. Okay. Now, if you have any questions, you can ask us. If otherwise, we'll discuss the questions.
Master, in the check host port function that you had shown just now, like what does the maybe unused thing mean? The it's inside
In which
two
function?
brackets. Check host
In which
port.
function?
Yeah,
Check
this
host
one.
port function. Okay, this
Yeah, in
function.
the for loop.
Check. Which for loop?
Yeah, the
Like the
maybe
first one or the
one
second
one
one?
six two. Yeah, the 1162.
One. Okay. So yeah, we are checking for all of these. Like first of all, we are checking if it's supported by the Unix, like if it's valid Unix socket support there. If it's true, then we'll proceed and get like we are getting the arguments for each of these functions. We'll try like first I2P, SAM, and then onion, and then proxy, and we'll check whether a user provided a string or something related to this, like whether the user used proxy and provide a respective string respective to this proxy or RPC bind. We are checking for all of these line by line, starting from here to the last, and we'll trying to get the value. If you don't specify hyphen proxy or hyphen RPC bind, then it's none. You can't get anything in the gets arg function. If you specify something using RPC bind, then you will get that value in the get args here. If you don't specify anything from here, you don't get anything. You will get none, and those things don't get proceed and don't get passed further to the split host port function here. The only thing passed here is only the thing you mentioned while written on the CLI, Bitcoin CLI. Nothing else you will see. Like if you don't use hyphen onion and provide the respective things related to this command, then you don't get anything using the get args. That's none for this. Okay.
Okay, and like what does a maybe unused thing mean?
Maybe unused. Yeah, yeah, correct. So maybe unused, specifying like all of these things doesn't to be included in the every run or every execution of the program. Like it may contain or it not maybe contain in the program or in your CLI command. It's not necessary to include all of these commands, like all of these. It's not necessary to write the all of these necessary commands. You can use only one or two or maybe, but it's not necessary to use all of these. That's what maybe unused here specifies.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Wait. Think. Sorry. I am changing the window to the this. Okay, so there is a first question. I already basically I already tell the reason behind all of these things. The question is why we need to move the port checking logic outside the app init main. Like we created a new function and move all the logic um, into that particular function. So why we did this? Anybody want to go?
Hey, you can go ahead and answer it, I think.
I can answer.
Yes, of course.
I think I already tell like the reason behind it simply the same. Like you don't want to run the code like if you provide unused or not a valid thing to your code. You don't you what you need to break the code early. You need you need to stop the further executions of the code.
Right.
So
So
you
the
need to catch the
check whether
yeah
the port address that has been passed as an argument to the RPC function is valid or not has been shifted out to a separate function,
yeah
and that logic checking is confined to that specific function. And if that argument that is being specified to it is invalid, then we don't need to execute the code any further.
yeah that's correct. That's absolutely correct. That's why we move the logic out because in further in the old code there is no other conditions that specify that like if this line of code fails or if this function fails what we need to do when we need to stop but now the new code states that if this is not returning true then we need to stop the further executions of the code.
Right.
Okay, yeah, same for the second question. The reason behind introducing the if condition, it's also the same. We need to bound the program to give us the right information without further executing in unexpected state. That's why we are checking it. I think that's all for the today's PR.